Welcome to Out There. I'm your host, Jeremy Maready, and on this two-part series, we're going to talk about the importance of Polk County's water quality. In the first episode, we're going to take you out onto the water to do a little bit of water sampling, and then back into the lab to show you what those water samples mean for Polk County's lakes and water bodies.
So today we're in Lakeland on Lake Crago, one of the public ramps we sample quarterly, right Dave, every 3 months. So this is part of our ambient monitoring program. What that means is that we come here on a regular schedule, not looking for anything in particular because of a complaint or any particular instance, but we're looking for essentially impacts from stormwater, runoff from roads, parking lots, yards. The two main things we're looking for is phosphorus and nitrogen levels in the water. We're going to take a sample from the center of the lake, location that we have saved on the GPS. Dave will be doing the sample collection as far as the bottles that we'll take back to the lab to run the analysis. And I'm going to be taking field readings for different parameters that DEP and EPA on a larger scale, what they're looking for. But the field readings also come into play with some of the chemical analysis that's done. And that's essentially what we're doing. We've got 4 lakes scheduled for today. Our big rule is because we're using taxpayer dollars, we only sample from ramps that are accessible to the public. Even if it's pay to use, as long as there's access to the public, we have it on our list to sample. So we do about 100 lakes, roughly 100 every 3 months. So we do all of those 4 times a year. And there's about 30 creeks, streams, rivers that we also sample every 3 months. So we try to be real consistent with our ambient monitoring. We collect the samples and the field readings from roughly a half meter below the surface. In order to get a good, a snapshot, and that's essentially what we're doing with our ambient program. We're taking a snapshot of what's here at this particular time. The reason that's important is because that's used over, say, 10, 20 years for trend analysis. So we're trying to essentially we're doing a checkup on the health of the lake. And the only way you can really do that is you have to be really consistent with where you're sampling. Some of it is driven by SOPs that's handed down from DEP. And so that, some with the depth and the way that Dave's going to collect the bottles and all, that's driven by standard operating procedures. The depth, the reason you wouldn't sample from the surface is because you could have pollen, you could have dust and things like that floating on the surface, which is just natural to the environment. But we're wanting to see, like I said, we try to be, we're consistent with what we've been doing over, 2+ decades of sampling. So part of the consistency that we try to stick with, number one, it's in order for the data to be valid, the results and the samples that we're collecting, that's why it's driven by the SOPs, because no matter who collects the samples anywhere in the state, DEP should be able to use that data and know that it's good data, that it's valid data. And so the reason we have to do all this, and like the instrument had to be checked this morning to make sure that it's in good working order. If we get audited, they check all that paperwork to make sure that, because if you're collecting the data and you're not doing what you're supposed to do, essentially, all of this means nothing. Yeah. And for Dave and I out here, this is where it starts. And if we don't collect the sample properly, then the stuff that's done in the lab doesn't mean anything. So that's why it's important. So it's handled almost like evidence. Mm-hmm. So we have to have a record of it from the time we collect it to the time it gets back to the lab. Essentially have a chain of custody to know where the sample's been at all times. Is it preserved properly? Is it labeled properly? And so all of this will get entered. I'll enter it into, essentially, we have a database that all this gets entered into.
We're standing here inside of the Polk County Parks and Natural Resources Laboratory with the laboratory manager, who's Diane Gibson. Mm-hmm. And Diane's been with us a number of years. Yes. And tell us a little bit about, what we're looking at here. I mean, we got a whole bunch of stuff that I think I could find trouble in around us, but walk us through a little bit about what you guys do.
Okay, well, mostly we go out and collect samples from the lakes and the streams in Polk County that have public access. So if the members of the public can get to the water from a county ramp, city ramp, fish camp, canal, whatever, as long as they can get on it, then we monitor it. So okay. Right now we have 110 sites on the lakes that we go out on quarterly and 26 stream stations. Okay. And so that quarterly amount is determined by the data users. That's how much data they need at a minimum to be able to make good decisions. Mm-hmm. So we have a crew that goes out and collects the samples, and then they bring them back here to the lab. And so our lab is certified by the state, and we have been in existence since 1984 is when the program started. And we are primarily looking at nitrogen and phosphorus, which come a lot of times from fertilizers and nutrients runoff off of the roads, that sort of thing. Also, we are looking at the color of the lakes and the alkalinity, which are the two other tests that are used by the state in their standard on determining whether lakes are meeting their required function. So the state, DEP, Environmental Protection, has a listing of all of the lakes in the state, and it says this is what the phosphorus and nitrogen levels should be in this type of water body. Okay. So we are generating data to help support that. Is that actually true for us? Because we know our lakes better than the state knows our lakes sometimes. And so we use a variety of tests to verify that, essentially.
Okay. Well, Polk has roughly 550?
550,
roughly?
554, depending on who you ask.
Okay. So of those, how many are publicly accessible?
About 100.
About 100, okay. So a lot of those just on private lands that folks can't get access to, phosphate type area?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have a map that shows our groups that we rotate through.
Okay.
Which might be helpful.
So I'm kind of curious, just as an overall, before we get into some of the other nitty gritty stuff, what's the state of our lakes? I mean, they're used quite a bit.
They are. Overall, I think that they're good. Mm-hmm. The ones in the Lakeland area tend to be a little more impacted. They have higher algae, higher nitrogen and phosphorus levels because there's more people there.
Just the density.
Exactly, contributing to it. And really it just depends what you want to do on the lake. So Lake Hancock's a great lake if you want to go look at, wildlife and things like that. But if you wanted to go water skiing, that's not what I would recommend, And so we get that question, is it a good lake? And that's really hard to answer.
just
Right?
kind
It
of
just
depending on which.
depends
I'm
what you
more of
wanna
the
do.
fishing type, so I know which lakes that are going to produce and where I want to go for that. But yeah, and then you have different different types of water qualities as well that you guys monitor. And I know, isn't it Crooked Lake that
Right, so Crooked Lake is designated as an outstanding Florida water body. So it's the only one in Polk County. And that's a designation made by the state legislature. So some people
that
got
like the-
together, it's like the gold star,
Okay, yeah.
sort of thing. And so there's always a lot of interest in Crooked Lake and how it's doing, know.
Well, running through, looking at the work that you guys do, I see beakers here behind us. I haven't been in a lab since I was in high school, so
Right.
forgive me. But you guys work with the different cities. You work with the state. What's the process that you go through
With the samples?
with the samples?
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, so the samples come in. We have some tests that we have to run right away because they have a short holding time. And so that's determined by the method. And so our field guys actually run some of the tests when they come back every afternoon. So that's unusual. A lot of times you're either field or lab, so we
Gotcha.
kind of multitask. And so we're looking at color of the lakes, like I mentioned before. That's actually one of used in the standard from the state.
Can you see a lot of the color just in the small samples,
So
or
the
when you're out
color-
in the field?
In the field, it all looks the same pretty much. And so we bring the sample back and filter out any algae and suspended particles. And so we're looking truly at the water, the color of the water. And we have, over on that side, there's a set of standards that we
Okay.
try to compare it to.
All right.
And then we also test for turbidity, which is the measure of suspended things kind of floating around, which is important if you are a fisherman. If there's a lot of suspended matter, then the sunlight can't get down to the fish.
that's what
and
baits you use.
Exactly,
Yep.
all that sort of thing. It's all interconnected. Let's see what else. We also run samples for the nitrogen and phosphorus. So that's actually what this instrument here is used for. So there's several different forms of it that we use. Data users are generally looking for total nitrogen and total phosphorus. So that's ultimately what we report.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, we also test for chlorophyll. So that is generally seen as the result of the nitrogen and phosphorus in the lakes. And so if you have a lot of chlorophyll, so a lot of algae, then that's generally because there's an input of nitrogen and phosphorus. And so sometimes in our lakes here in Polk County, we have phosphorus in the ground, right?
Just
Just
naturally.
because. And so we have been able to use our data with the state on some of the lakes that with their model, they were giving us a different target, and we were able to show we'll never meet that target because we have phosphorus there anyways, and so that is one of the benefits of having the long-term monitoring program is that we have enough data to be able to kind of take a stand sometimes and say, no, this is really how it is.
We know a little bit more than y'all do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the model might say this, but this is what the data actually shows.
Okay. Well, also something that's been of a lot of public interest in the last couple of years has been algae blooms. And I know that's something that you guys are working to monitor and kind of starting that data collection.
Right.
And like you had talked a little bit about that and what we're
Okay,
doing.
so that is completely separate from the lab.
Sure.
So the lab stuff in here, everything that we run in here, we're certified to run. So the algae bloom really came about because IFAS down the Stewart Center, created a very nice poster about the dangers of the harmful algae blooms and put us as the contact of who to call for more information. And so then we were like, we really need to, get knowledgeable about this. So it's really been in the news a lot lately. There are many, many types of algae, obviously. And then underneath that are the ones that can make toxins. And so those are the ones that are of concern. And of those many that can make toxins, there are about 7 or 8 different varieties that you would expect to find in our climate.
Okay.
And so we've narrowed it down from all algae to the blue-green algae to these particular ones that we're looking for, right? And of those that you're looking for, they don't always make toxins. It just depends.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things. Just because you find the organism, you have to look at the quantity. You know, is the lake overrun with it, or are there just a few? And then if it's producing the toxin. Now that's not anything that we have the ability to do. So generally, if we either get a complaint or one of our field staff bring us a sample back and say, hey, I saw this, it looked like maybe a bloom was starting, we will look at the sample and try to determine if it is those particular ones that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And in sufficient quantity for it to actually be a bloom. And so that's kind of a fuzzy term right now.
Just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's just there all the time, mm-hmm. you know, and that's just part of that particular ecosystem. But if we find what we feel to be a sufficient quantity, then we notify the state, the Department of Environmental Protection, and then they will send a team out to assess. And so they will collect samples, and they actually can test the samples and see if it's making the toxin. Okay. And then there's a website that they report, and they update it like daily, hourly, sometimes it seems. And so we also monitor that, because there's things that happen. I mean, we're out on the lakes a lot, but we're only out on each lake 4 times, you know, so we really are relying on the invasive plant people, the cities, you know, citizens, anybody, to let us know if there are suspected blooms. Anyway, so we keep an eye on that DEP website, and we can kind of see what's going on in the area and who else is sampling, that sort of thing. Also, we also work with the Department of Health, the Polk County Health Department, rather, mm-hmm. and because their focus is human health. And so then if there is a strong bloom indicated, somebody up the chain in the health department will have them go out and put a sign that posts it.
To do the public notice
and all that sort of thing. So that is the health department. That is not us. So we have a lot of moving parts with this, mm-hmm. you know, and so we try to stay informed and share information. And so it's definitely still a learning process. We're still learning how to identify and all of that.
Well, I know it's been a big issue in recent years in South Florida, you know, with the discharge and all of that that's going out. Are we different up here? I mean, I know these are different ecosystems that we're talking about, freshwater to saltwater, you know, those types of different feeders that go into the rivers, that they see algae blooms down there. The algae blooms that we have here, are we talking apples to apples here, or just different type of ecosystem?
Different ecosystems.
Okay.
Yeah, and particularly between the red tide and the harmful algae blooms. Those are 2 completely different organisms, right? You know, but a lot of times they get talked about at the same time. But really, the state is really focusing more on Okeechobee, because you have it feeding out, you know, to so many places with the canals and whatnot. And then, you know, they've been seeing those incredible blooms, and, you know, it affects tourism and not just the ecosystem, but really the money, the tourism. And so that seems to be where the state is really focusing with this task force that has been created. So
now you had mentioned about how, you know, the different types of things that, you know, we have in our yards and whatnot that can filter down into the lakes that can add to the problems that you guys are testing for. What are some of those things that folks can look at in their own homes that can help, you know, add to the health of our lakes?
The proper application of fertilizer is probably the biggest thing that homeowners can do. The effects that you might see in the lakes would be an increase in the algae, because basically you're feeding the algae, right?
Because they thrive, the algae thrives off of that.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, they're green organisms, and so they like it very much. But then you also have problems that are created not just from the algae bloom that you're going to probably see from the input, but then at some point they're going to die, and then now you've got stinky dead algae, right? And so that's in the water column as well. And so some of it'll just stay in the water column, some will settle to the bottom, and then it just becomes part of the layer of stuff on the bottom of the lake. And it continues, and if it's a shallow lake and you get windy days and things get stirred up, then your visibility gets decreased. And so then you start seeing maybe fish kills, because the fish can't breathe because there's so much other stuff in there. And so it just really starts this whole chain, you know.
And we've seen the fish kills in various lakes and whatnot,
Yes,
which
yes.
some of that's a natural process.
It is. Some of it is just related to the way the dissolved oxygen cycles in a water body, and it's dependent on temperature of just the climate, the temperature of the water, sunny days, rainy days. I mean, there's a whole big stew of things that go together for that.
And all the data you guys got to show that, right?
yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. All right, we're out here at Lake Gwynn with Hans Zarbock, Polk County's Natural Resources Stormwater Manager. And you oversee quite an important component of Polk County's Parks and Natural Resources Division.
Yes,
Tell us a little bit about that.
certainly. Our place in the county organization is we are part of the Parks and Natural Resources Division. Within that division, we are within the Land and Water Environmental Lands Program, and then within that, we are the Water Resources Group. Part of that is us, the Stormwater, and also our chemical laboratory with Diane Gibson. The Stormwater Group has quite a few responsibilities. First and foremost is keeping the county in compliance with the state stormwater permit. A lot of acronyms, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, Municipal Storm Sewer Systems, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, NPDES MS4. I won't say that again. There are many components to that. Besides that, we operate and maintain and actually construct numerous water quality facilities around the county. Treatment ponds, treatment wetlands. We have other best management practices, BMPs, that collect trash within the system, baffle boxes. And we have about 20 around the county right now. Our group has a dedicated funding source. The Municipal Separate Taxing Unit, MSTU, for stormwater. Also, we have some oversight from the county's Stormwater Technical Advisory Committee. When the MSTU ordinance was passed in 2013, the County Commission assigned 5 individuals to the stack, as we call it, and we have meetings every so often and they, we tell them what we do and take their input and hopefully get their blessing on things. So that's been a very productive and useful relationship there. In fact, we're due for a meeting in the very near future. We also conduct classes, erosion and sediment control classes, and teaching people how to look out for illicit discharges. Illicit discharge is anything other than stormwater that goes into the drainage system. Things like oil, any petroleum products, chlorinated water, paint, whatever. So we, and then when we get complaints from citizens, we go out and investigate that too. Sure. We also do studies on lakes or the streams in the county, primarily to identify pollutant sources and also to identify methods of mitigating the pollutant loadings to the lakes and protecting and improving the water quality. And that's our main mission is to improve and protect water quality within the county, surface water quality.
Sure.
We also maintain the county's water atlas. It's a website. It's actually the University of South Florida does the heavy lifting on that, but the Water Atlas website contains a lot of water quality information and hydrologic information, and that's accessible from anyone. You just type in Polk Water Atlas, and it'll take you right to it. It's a really, really wonderful, wonderful thing to have. Also, we track water quality trends for our different lakes. We do that. We use the data that Diane gets us from the lab. We summarize that annually to provide with our stormwater permit annual report. And we also use the trends to track the effectiveness of our water quality treatment facilities. My cheat sheet here, we do stormwater sampling. We use an automated sampler. When we have a priority water body, we set the sampler up and we leave it there for, say, 6 months, take numerous, collect water from several storm events and analyze it and see what the so-called pollutant loading is to that water body from that discharge point. So we have a lot to keep us busy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But it's also a lot that's very, vitally important to our county here and the residents who, use all of our different lakes and water bodies and throughout the county, really.
Yes.
Well, that about does it for this edition of Out There. Join us next time for the second of our two-part series on the importance of Polk County's water quality.